Okay, so we've all been there,
Yeah.
right? You're totally psyched about some new goal, and then life just happens. And that initial, motivation you had kind of fizzles out.
It's so relatable.
So that's what we're going deep on today.
Yeah.
Self-discipline.
Hmm.
We're talking way beyond just those basic tips and tricks. We've got a whole stack of guides and research articles and stuff.
It's going to be good.
Yeah, and we're going to pull out the real gems, the stuff that can actually help you make a lasting change.
Totally. And it's funny, a lot of the stuff we read actually pushes back against this whole idea that motivation is everything. That's what we need.
Yeah.
They say, sure, that initial spark is great,
Right.
but it's self-discipline that really keeps you going over the long haul.
It's like that Jocko Willink quote, discipline equals freedom.
Oh, yeah, I love that one.
But I've always kind of struggled with that, to be honest.
How so?
Doesn't discipline, by definition mean restriction? So how does that equal freedom?
Yeah, that's a good point. It does seem kind of paradoxical at first. But think about it this way. When you're building self-discipline, you're basically training your brain to do what you know you should do, even when you don't feel like it.
Okay.
And that freedom from impulsivity, that's what lets you make choices that actually serve you.
Yeah.
In the long run, it leads to a greater sense of autonomy.
So instead of being controlled by every little fleeting desire or pressure from the outside world, you're the one who's in control.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head.
I like that.
And some of these sources get even deeper into it. They connect this whole thing to cognitive behavioral therapy.
Interesting.
They explain how when you act on your goals consistently, even in tiny ways, it builds this sense of self-efficacy.
Self-efficacy. So a belief in your ability to succeed.
Exactly. And then that reinforces your self-discipline even more. So it's this positive feedback loop.
Well, that makes sense. So it's you're proving to yourself that you're capable, and then that just fuels your desire to keep pushing forward.
You got it.
Yeah.
Now, one of the most common things we saw in these materials was this 2190 rule for habit formation.
Oh, yeah, the 2190 rule.
Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I've heard of it, but honestly, I've always been a little skeptical.
Yeah.
It just seems almost too simplistic.
Right. And to be fair, the sources do acknowledge that it's not some magic formula.
Okay.
It's more of a useful guideline. They even bring up some studies suggesting that the actual time frame for forming a habit can vary a lot depending on the person and how complex the habit is.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
No, not at all. What's more important than the specific time frame is that idea of consistency.
Consistency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They really emphasize how important it is to break down big goals into smaller, more manageable actions.
Smaller actions.
And they go beyond just saying start small. They get into techniques like habit stacking. Have you heard of that?
Habit stacking.
I don't think so.
It's basically where you link a new habit to one you already have.
Oh, interesting.
And then there's time boxing, which is where you set aside specific times for working on your new habit.
Okay. I haven't tried those strategies. I'm definitely intrigued.
But even when I have the best intentions, I still find it hard to track my progress and stay motivated. Did the sources talk about that at all?
They did, and they went beyond the usual advice to just use a journal or an app.
Okay.
They had some really interesting research on the psychology of motivation.
Oh, cool. Like what?
Well, one study found that visualizing your progress can actually significantly boost your commitment.
Even if it's just in a really simple way.
Yeah, they said it didn't have to be anything fancy.
So it's not just about checking things off a to-do list. It's about actually seeing how far you've come.
Exactly. In this study, they had people track their progress towards a fitness goal. They either used a simple checklist or they had a visual representation, like a bar graph that filled up as they did more workouts.
Okay.
And the people who used the visual representation, they said they felt way more motivated and they were more likely to stick with their exercise routine.
Wow, that's so interesting. I'm a very visual person, so I could totally see how that'd be helpful.
Yeah, and speaking of helpful, a lot of the sources talked about how self-discipline is linked to your overall well-being.
Really?
They said it's not just about reaching external goals, it's also about cultivating the sense of inner peace and fulfillment.
That really resonates with me. When I'm disciplined in my habits, I definitely feel more balanced and less stressed.
Right, and there's research to back that up.
Yeah.
One study found that people with more self-discipline had less anxiety and depression.
Really?
Yeah, and they also tended to have stronger relationships and were more satisfied with their jobs.
So it's not just about getting things done, it's about having a better life overall.
Exactly, and they even went a step further and explored how self-discipline is connected to personal freedom.
Okay. Now that's something I definitely want to hear more about.
Yeah.
How can something that often feels restrictive lead to more freedom.
Well, they argue that true freedom isn't about just giving in to every whim you have.
Right.
It's about having the power to make choices that align with your values, even when you're faced with temptation.
So it's about breaking free from those impulsive desires that can lead us down paths we don't really want to go down?
Exactly. One source even compared it to that famous marshmallow experiment.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the one where kids could either eat one marshmallow right away or wait and get two later.
The classic test of delayed gratification.
Yep. And the study showed that the kids who could resist that immediate temptation ended up having better outcomes later in life.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. They had higher SAT scores, lower BMIs, even reported being happier. It's amazing how much one simple experiment can tell us about our ability to make good choices for our future selves.
I know, right? It really shows how beneficial self-control can be in the long run. Now, speaking of benefits, several sources talked about how self-discipline can have this ripple effect.
A ripple effect.
Yeah. It impacts not only your personal life, but also your relationships and even society as a whole.
That's a really interesting perspective. I'd never thought about the social implications of self-discipline before.
Yeah. One argument they made was that when people are more disciplined with their time and commitments, they become more reliable and present for the people in their lives.
That makes a lot of sense. When I'm feeling overwhelmed and disorganized, I'm not the best version of myself, and my relationships suffer.
Exactly. And on a bigger scale, the sources said that societies where people have a lot of self-discipline tend to be more productive, innovative, and even compassionate.
So individual self-discipline can actually contribute to a stronger and happier community.
That's the idea. But let's get down to brass tacks. How do we actually build this self-discipline superpower?
Okay, I'm all ears.
Well, the sources all agreed that setting clear and specific goals is super important.
That makes sense. You can't really be disciplined if you don't know what you're aiming for.
Right, and they didn't just say set goals, they talked about SMART goals.
Smart goal.
Goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
I've heard of SMART goals before, but I've never really used them. Maybe that's what I've been missing.
It could be. But even with well-defined goals, staying focused can be tough.
Oh, tell me about it. I am the queen of distraction. My phone is basically glued to my hand. Did any of the sources address that?
They did. And one strategy that stood out was creating a distraction-free environment.
Okay.
They said to figure out what your triggers are and then proactively remove those temptations.
So if social media is my downfall, I should put my phone in another room when I'm trying to work.
Exactly. It's all about setting yourself up for success instead of constantly battling distractions.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Did they have any other tips for staying focused?
They did. They talked about time boxing.
Unboxing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's basically scheduling specific blocks of time for different tasks.
I've heard of that, but I'm always a little hesitant to schedule things so rigidly.
Yeah, it can feel a little controlling. But the sources presented some interesting research about how beneficial time boxing can be, especially for people who procrastinate a lot. They found that when you allocate specific time slots for tasks, it can actually reduce stress and make you more productive. It creates structure and helps prevent that feeling of being overwhelmed.
That's pretty compelling. Maybe I should be more open to different time management techniques.
Might be worth a try.
But even with the best strategy, sometimes that negative self-talk just creeps in, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And the sources talked about that too. They stressed the importance of self-compassion.
Self-compassion.
They said instead of beating yourself up for mistakes or setbacks, you should treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you'd offer a friend.
It's true. We are so much harder on ourselves than we would ever be on anyone else.
Totally.
Yeah.
And they suggested replacing that negative self-talk with positive affirmations.
Okay, I know affirmations are really popular these days, but to be honest, I've always been a bit skeptical.
I get it. But the sources had some fascinating research on the neuroscience of affirmations.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they explained how when you repeatedly say positive things to yourself, it can actually change your brain.
No way.
It helps you develop a more positive self-image.
So it's not just about thinking happy thoughts, it's about actually making lasting changes in our brains.
Exactly. And they said this can have a huge impact on your motivation and resilience.
I'm definitely intrigued.
Now, speaking of resilience, one of the sources made a really interesting connection between self-discipline and perfectionism.
Ooh, that's something I definitely struggle with. I tend to set really high standards for myself, which can make me procrastinate and even burn out. Do they have any advice for dealing with that?
They did. Their main message was to embrace the idea of progress over perfection.
Progress over perfection.
I like that.
They said that perfectionism often comes from a fear of failure, and that can stop you from taking action.
Oh, I've definitely avoided going after certain goals because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to do them perfectly.
Yeah, that's a common trap. But the sources emphasize that accepting your imperfections is essential for growing and learning.
They suggested shifting your focus from trying to be flawless to celebrating small wins and seeing setbacks as chances to improve.
That's a much more empowering way to look at things.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off of having to be perfect
Yeah,
and lets you enjoy the process.
exactly. And they even recommended incorporating mindfulness practices into your self-discipline routine.
Mindfulness. How does that tie into self-discipline?
Well, they explain that mindfulness is all about being present and aware of your thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations without judging yourself.
Okay.
And this can be super helpful when you're tempted to get distracted or fall into negative self-talk.
So instead of being controlled by those impulses, you can take a step back, observe them, and then make a conscious choice about how to react.
Exactly. And one of the simplest ways to practice mindfulness is through focused breathing exercises.
Breathing exercises. That seems almost too basic.
I know it sounds simple, but the sources cited studies showing that even just a few minutes of focused breathing can reduce stress and help you concentrate. It's about bringing your attention to the present moment, which can help you break free from those habitual patterns of distraction and negativity.
That's fascinating. I never really thought of breathing exercises as a self-discipline tool, but I'm definitely willing to try it. Did they recommend any other mindfulness technique?
Yeah, they mentioned body scan meditations.
Body scan meditations.
Where you focus your attention on different parts of your body and notice any sensations you feel.
I've heard of those. They sound super relaxing.
They are. And they also talked about mindful walking,
Mindful walking.
where you pay attention to the feeling of your feet on the ground, the movement of your body, and everything you see and hear around you.
Oh, I love going for walks, but I usually just zone out and let my mind wander. I'll have to try being more mindful on my next walk.
I think you'll like it. Did the sources offer any advice for those times when you're really struggling and feel like giving up on your goals?
They did, and one of the most powerful suggestions was to remember your past successes.
So, like, give yourself a pep talk and remember that you've overcome challenges before. Exactly. It's about tapping into that inner strength and resilience you already have. And they also emphasized how important it is to seek support from others.
Talking to a friend or mentor can definitely help when you're feeling discouraged. Do they have any other strategies?
Yes, they encouraged practicing self-compassion and reminding yourself that it's okay to have moments of doubt and that setbacks are a normal part of the process.
It seems like self-compassion was a big theme in these sources.
It's a key ingredient for building self-discipline. And they also offer this really inspiring thought. Giving up is a permanent decision, but setbacks are temporary.
That's a great way to look at it. It's about keeping the big picture in mind.
Exactly. And sometimes those moments when you feel like giving up are actually opportunities for breakthroughs.
Breakthroughs, how so?
Sometimes you need to hit a wall in order to find a new path, a new approach, a new level of determination.
That's such an empowering way to think about it. It's about seeing challenges as part of the growth process.
Precisely. And they had some really encouraging advice for people who are just starting to work on their self-discipline.
I'm sure that's helpful for a lot of people. Starting anything new can be overwhelming. What did they say?
Their main piece of advice was to start with just one small habit.
Just one?
Yeah.
That seems almost too easy.
It's about focusing on being consistent in one area before you try to do too much at once.
Makes sense. It's like building a solid foundation.
Exactly. They suggested picking a habit that's relatively easy to do and that fits with your values and goals.
Something that feels both achievable and meaningful.
Right. And they also emphasize the importance of setting realistic expectations.
Realistic expectations.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that self-discipline takes time and effort to develop. There will be bumps along the way, and that's okay.
So it's about enjoying the journey.
Imperfections and all.
Exactly. And they encourage beginners to focus on progress, not perfection.
Progress over perfection. I love that. It takes the pressure off.
It does. And remember, every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory. This is all such encouraging advice for anyone who's just starting to work on their self-discipline.
It's about empowering yourself to create positive change one step at a time.
This has been such an insightful conversation about self-discipline. I feel like we've really gone beyond the surface level and explored the psychology and even the societal impact of this powerful skill.
I agree. It's been great.
I'm excited to hear what other gems you've uncovered from these sources.
Oh, I've got plenty more to share. They say true freedom isn't about just doing whatever you want whenever you want. It's more about having the control to make choices that line up with your values, even when things are tempting you to do otherwise.
So you're saying it's about breaking free from those impulses that lead us down those paths we don't really want to go down.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like one source even compared it to the marshmallow experiment.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that one where the kids could choose to eat one marshmallow now or wait and get two later.
Oh, yeah. The classic delayed gratification test.
Right, and those studies found that the kids who could resist that temptation to get the marshmallow right away, they actually ended up having better outcomes later in life.
I remember reading about that. They had higher SAT scores, lower BMIs. They even said they were happier. It's crazy how much we can learn about making good choices from one simple experiment.
It is pretty wild, and it really highlights how self-control can benefit you in the long run. Speaking of benefits, several sources talk about how self-discipline can create this ripple effect.
A ripple effect? What do you mean?
It not only affects your personal life, but also your relationships and even society as a whole.
It's pretty interesting. I've never thought about self-discipline having a social impact before.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. One argument they made was that when people are more disciplined with their time and commitments, they become more reliable and present for the people in their lives.
Yeah, that makes sense. When I'm overwhelmed and unorganized, I'm definitely not my best self, and my relationships suffer because of it.
Exactly. And the sources also argued that on a larger scale, societies where people have strong self-discipline tend to be more productive, innovative, and even more compassionate.
So basically, individual self-discipline can lead to a stronger and happier community.
That's the gist of it. But how do we actually get better at this whole self-discipline thing?
Okay, I'm ready for the secret formula.
No, there's not really a secret formula. But the sources all agreed that setting clear, specific goals is super important.
That makes sense. It's kind of hard to be disciplined if you don't know what you're working towards.
Right. And they went beyond just saying set goals. They talked about using SMART goals.
SMART goals. Remind me what those are again.
Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Oh, right, SMART goals. I've heard of those, but I've never actually used them. Maybe that's where I've been going wrong.
It's definitely a helpful framework, but even with clear goals, it can still be hard to stay focused.
Ugh. Tell me about it. I'm so easily distracted. My phone is like permanently attached to my hand. Do they talk about that at all?
Oh yeah, they did. And one strategy that came up a lot was creating a distraction-free environment.
Okay. How do I do that?
Basically, you got to figure out what your biggest triggers are and then actively remove those temptations.
So if social media is my weakness, I should just put my phone in a different room when I'm trying to get work done.
Exactly. It's all about setting yourself up for success instead of constantly having to fight off those distractions.
That's a good point. Do they have any other tips for staying focused?
Yeah, they talked about something called time boxing.
Time boxing. What's that?
It's basically when you schedule blocks of time for specific tasks.
I've heard of that, but I always get kind of nervous about scheduling things so rigidly. It feels too controlling.
I get that. It can feel that way. But the sources actually presented research about how helpful time boxing can be, especially for people who struggle with procrastination.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they found that when you set aside specific times for different tasks, it can help you feel less stressed and get more done. It creates structure and prevents you from feeling overwhelmed.
Maybe I should be more open to experimenting with different time management techniques.
It could be a game changer.
Okay, I'm willing to try. But even with all the best strategies and time management hacks, sometimes that negative self-talk just sneaks in.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. And the sources address that too. They really emphasized how important self-compassion is.
Self-compassion.
Basically, instead of beating yourself up when you mess up or have a setback, you treat yourself with the same kindness you would offer a friend.
That's so true. We're way harder on ourselves than we are on anyone else.
For sure. And one thing they suggested was replacing negative self-talk with positive affirmations.
Positive affirmations are pretty popular these days, but honestly, I've always been kind of skeptical.
I get it, but
you-
the sources actually talked about the neuroscience of affirmations.
The neuroscience. Interesting.
Yeah. They explained that when you repeat positive statements over and over, it actually changes your brain.
Seriously.
Seriously. It helps you develop a more positive self-image.
So it's not just about thinking happy thoughts, it's about actually rewiring your brain.
You got it. And they said this can have a huge impact on your motivation and resilience.
Okay, I'm convinced I need to start doing affirmations.
You should. Now, one source pointed out a really interesting connection between self-discipline and perfectionism.
Ooh, perfectionism is my middle name. I set really high standards for myself, which can lead to procrastination and even burnout. Did they have any tips for overcoming that?
They did. Their main message was to embrace the idea of progress over perfection.
Progress over perfection. I like the sound of that.
They said perfectionism often stems from a fear of failure, and that fear can paralyze you and prevent you from taking action.
That's so me. I've definitely avoided going after certain goals because I was afraid of not being able to do them perfectly.
It's a common trap, but the sources really stressed that accepting your imperfections is essential for growing and learning.
Okay.
They said instead of focusing on being flawless, you should try to celebrate small wins and see setbacks as opportunities for improvement.
That's a much healthier way to look at it. It
Yeah.
takes a lot of pressure off
Yeah,
and lets you enjoy the journey more.
for sure. And they even suggested adding mindfulness practices to your self-discipline routine.
Mindfulness. How does that help with self-discipline?
Well, mindfulness is all about being present and aware of your thoughts, feelings, and sensations without judging yourself.
Okay.
And that can be really helpful when you're tempted to get distracted or start beating yourself up.
So instead of being controlled by those urges, you can pause, notice what's happening, and then make a conscious choice about how to respond.
Exactly. And one of the easiest ways to practice mindfulness is through focused breathing exercises.
Breathing exercises. It seems so simple.
It is. But the sources mention research showing that even a few minutes of focused breathing can significantly lower your stress and improve your focus.
Really?
Yeah, it's all about bringing your attention to the present moment, which can help you break free from those automatic patterns of distraction and negative thinking.
Wow, I'd never thought of breathing exercises as a self-discipline tool, but I'm willing to give it a shot. Did they suggest any other mindfulness techniques?
Yeah, they mentioned body scan meditations.
Body scan meditations, what are those?
Basically, you focus on each part of your body one at a time and notice any sensations you feel.
I've heard of those. They sound super relaxing.
They are. And they also mention mindful walking.
Mindful walking.
It's when you pay attention to the sensations of your feet on the ground, the movement of your body, and all the sights and sounds around you.
Oh, I love going for walks, but I usually just zone out and let my mind wander. I should try to be more mindful on my next walk.
I think you'll really enjoy it.
Okay, I'm adding it to my list. Did they have any other advice for those moments when you're feeling super discouraged and tempted to just give up on your goals?
They did, and one powerful suggestion was to remember times when you've been successful in the past.
So, like, give yourself a pep talk and remind yourself that you've overcome challenges before.
Exactly. It's about tapping into that inner strength and resilience that you already have. And they also emphasized how important it is to get support from others.
Talking to a friend or mentor can definitely make a big difference when you're feeling down. Did they have any other advice?
Yes, they recommended being kind to yourself and reminding yourself that it's okay to have moments of doubt and that setbacks are a normal part of the process.
It seems like self-compassion is a really important part of self-discipline.
It is. And they also shared this really inspiring quote, "Giving up is a permanent decision, but setbacks are temporary."
I love that. It's a great reminder to keep things in perspective.
And sometimes those moments when you feel like throwing in the towel, they're actually opportunities for breakthroughs.
Breakthroughs? What do you mean?
Sometimes you need to hit a wall in order to find a new way forward, a new approach, a new level of determination.
That's a great way to think about it. It's like challenges are just part of growing.
Precisely. And they also had some great advice for people who are just starting out with self-discipline.
I bet that's helpful for a lot of people. Starting anything new can be intimidating. What did they say?
Their biggest piece of advice was to start with one small habit.
Just one? That seems too easy.
It might seem that way. Yeah. But it's about focusing on being consistent with one thing before you try to change everything at once.
That makes sense. You got to build a strong foundation first.
Right. They recommended choosing a habit that's pretty easy to do and that aligns with your values and goals.
So something that feels achievable and meaningful.
Exactly. And they also emphasized how important it is to set realistic expectations.
Realistic expectations.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that self-discipline is a skill that takes time and effort to develop. You're going to have setbacks along the way, and that's totally normal.
So it's about enjoying the journey even with all its imperfections.
Exactly. They encouraged people to focus on progress, not perfection.
Progress over perfection. I like that. It takes the pressure off.
Right, and they said that every step forward, no matter how small it is a victory.
This is all great advice for people who are just starting to work on their self-discipline.
Absolutely. It's about giving yourself the power to create positive change in your life one step at a time.
This has been such an insightful conversation about self-discipline. We've gone so much deeper than just the surface level stuff and explored the psychology and even the social impact of this powerful skill.
It's been a great conversation.
I can't wait to hear what other gems you found in these sources.
Oh yeah, there's definitely more. One thing that really stood out to me was how they emphasized that self-discipline isn't about deprivation. It's more about empowerment. Like you're giving yourself the freedom to live a life that's true to your values and goals.
I like that perspective. It's like
Yeah.
shifting your mindset from I can't to I choose.
Exactly. And it reminded me of the study they talked about, where researchers found that when people framed healthy choices as acts of self-care instead of restrictions, they were more likely to stick with them over time.
So like instead of seeing a workout as a chore, I
Yeah.
could reframe it as being kind to my body.
Exactly. It's all about changing that internal dialogue from negative to supportive.
Okay, I can see that would make a huge difference.
Yeah.
But did any of the sources talk about those really ingrained habits that are super hard to break? You know, the ones that feel like they're just wired into our brains?
They did, and they had some interesting ideas. One common theme was understanding the triggers behind those habits.
Triggers. What do you mean by that?
Well, let's say you want to be more mindful about your spending, but you always end up overspending when you're stressed.
Oh man, I know that feeling all too well.
In that example, stress is the trigger.
Okay, that makes sense.
The key is to become aware of those patterns so you can come up with ways to break them.
So you need to identify those moments when you're most vulnerable and have a plan for how to deal with them.
Exactly. And one technique they talked about was urge surfing.
Urge surfing. What's that?
It's this mindfulness technique where you notice the urge, but instead of giving in, you just observe it as it comes and goes, like a wave.
So you ride it out instead of letting it control you.
You got it. They also said it's important to replace bad habits with good ones.
So instead of just trying to stop doing the bad stuff, you should focus on adding good habits that can take their place.
Right. One source used the analogy of a garden. If you just pull out the weeds without planting anything new, the weeds are probably just going to grow back. But if you plant healthy plants, they'll eventually crowd out the weeds.
I love that analogy. It's so true. You got to create an environment where good habits can thrive. Did they have any other strategies for dealing with those stubborn habits?
Yeah, they talked about visualization, where you imagine yourself successfully resisting temptation and achieving your goal.
So it's like creating a mental movie of your future self living the way you want to.
Exactly. And they mentioned studies showing that visualization can actually activate the same parts of your brain as if you were actually doing the thing.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. It's like giving your brain a sneak peek of success.
It is. And they also talked about how important it is to have a strong why behind your goals.
Like a deeper purpose that motivates you.
Exactly. They said when your motivation comes from something truly meaningful, it's much easier to resist temptation and stay committed, even when things get tough.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like having a guiding light to help you through the tough times.
You got it. This has been such a fascinating conversation about self-discipline. We've really gone deep on this topic, haven't we?
We have. We've covered everything from the science of habits to the impact of self-discipline on society as a whole. It's been amazing.
I agree. If you had to pick one key takeaway for our listeners, what would it be?
That's a good question. I think the biggest takeaway is that self-discipline isn't a destination, it's a journey.
A journey.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process of growing, learning, and adapting.
So it's not about reaching some perfect level of self-control, but about continually working at it.
Exactly. There will be setbacks, there will be moments of doubt, but the key is to just keep showing up, keep learning, and keep trying to be the best version of yourself.
That's a great message. And it reminds us that self-discipline isn't about punishing ourselves or depriving ourselves. It's about giving ourselves the power to create the lives we want.
Absolutely. It's about freedom, fulfillment, and the joy of writing our own stories.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, I think that wraps up our deep dive into the world of self-discipline. We've covered a ton of ground today, from the neuroscience behind habit formation to the ripple effect of self-discipline on society as a whole.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. I hope our listeners have gained some valuable insights and feel inspired to start their own self-discipline journey.
Me too.
Remember, start small, be consistent, and celebrate your progress along the way. And never forget the incredible power you have to shape your own destiny.